In a courthouse where justice should be blind, a respected black judge will face discrimination head-on, from those sworn to uphold the law. Camille Dawson, known for her unbreakable integrity, climbed the courthouse steps as the morning sun cast golden light over the marble halls. Yet something in the air felt off, like a shadow lurking in a place meant to be pure. Today, despite her years of hard-won respect, Camille was about to confront a blatant act of prejudice, one that would test her deepest beliefs and set off a powerful response no one saw coming. Before we dive into this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, let's get started. As Camille reached the courthouse doors, a young white officer named Officer Miller stepped directly into her path. Broad-shouldered and with a hardened look, his eyes narrowed as they fell on Camille with a suspicion that felt out of place. He crossed his arms, blocking the entrance. "Ma'am, you'll need to stop right there," he said, his tone flat but edged with hostility. Camille blinked, momentarily taken aback. She held out her ID calmly. "I'm Judge Camille Dawson," she replied, her voice steady. Yet Officer Miller's gaze barely flickered. Instead, he sneered. "I don't care who you claim to be," he shot back, his words dripping with disdain. "You don't belong here." For a brief, frozen moment, Camille felt the shock ripple through her. She was used to being greeted with respect, but this felt personal, as if he was challenging her very right to be there. She took a step forward, her resolve unshaken. "Officer, I have a docket to attend to inside." "Step aside, please," she stated firmly. But Miller's stance hardened further, refusing to move, his contempt unmistakable. The words hung between them, a silent confrontation. Camille stood her ground, realizing this was no ordinary encounter. This wasn't just about one officer's defiance. This was a direct affront to her very presence in this place of justice. Camille's heart quickened, not with fear, but with a deep-rooted anger she'd held back for years. This wasn't the first time she'd encountered discrimination, but never so blatantly, never right at the entrance to the very courthouse where she presided. The weight of history bore down on her shoulders, centuries of voices silenced, dreams dismissed, all because of the color of their skin. This was no longer just about her. It was about every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. Taking a steady breath, she lifted her head, her voice unwavering. "Officer Miller, I'm not going anywhere. I'm Judge Camille Dawson, and I have full authority to be here. You will not deny me entry." But Miller's face twisted into a sneer. "You judges think you're above it all, don't you?" he retorted, his voice thick with contempt. "You think a robe gives you the right to walk in anywhere, huh? Not today!" But about the integrity of the entire system. This was the moment to decide, stay silent, or stand up for the justice she believed in. Camille knew, deep down, that the choice had already been made. Clarity washed over Camille like a sudden burst of light cutting through darkness. This wasn't just a personal insult. What happened at the courthouse door was a symptom of a much larger, deep-rooted issue. Camille knew that silence would only allow the prejudice and systemic racism she faced to persist. Years spent in the pursuit of justice would mean nothing if she accepted this injustice quietly. She met Jamal's gaze, her determination unmistakable. "You're right, Jamal. Staying silent won't make this go away. It's time we shed light on what's really happening here, not just for me, but for every person who's ever been told they don't belong." Jamal's eyes lit up with approval. "We need to get the truth out there, Judge. People need to see this for what it is." Camille took a steady breath, a plan forming in her mind. She would not allow this to be swept under the rug. This was the moment to turn her frustration into action, to challenge the very system she had worked within for years. It was time to take this fight public. That afternoon, Camille met with Lena McKinney, an experienced journalist renowned for her fearless approach to stories that challenged societal norms. As Camille sat across from her in the small, dimly lit cafe, she felt a weight lift slightly, as if speaking about the injustice might lessen its sting. Lena leaned forward, her notepad ready, eyes sharp with a curiosity that Camille knew came from a deep sense of responsibility. Camille took a deep breath. Lena, I need the public to know what's happening in the very place meant to uphold justice. What happened at the courthouse door wasn't just about me. It's about a system that allows prejudice to go unchecked. And if it can happen to a judge, it can happen to anyone." Lena nodded, her pen moving quickly as Camille spoke. "This is bigger than a single incident," Lena agreed. "This is a pattern. A judge, someone with your authority, being denied entry and disrespected? That's a story the public needs to hear." Camille continued, feeling a surge of conviction. "Exactly. I want people to understand that this isn't an isolated event. It's part of a larger issue that affects countless people who look like me, who walk into these same courthouses and wonder if justice will ever be truly blind." Lena's face softened with empathy, yet her eyes stayed focused and resolute. "We'll frame this in a way that highlights the systemic issue. We'll make sure this isn't just a headline, Camille. People need to feel the weight of this, to understand the depth of what you went through." Camille felt a glimmer of hope. Lena's dedication to telling the truth had made her a trusted voice in the community, someone who wouldn't shy away from exposing uncomfortable truths. Together, they discussed details, agreeing to focus not just on the incident but on the broader implications for racial justice within the legal system. As they wrapped up their conversation, Lena looked directly at Camille. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, a hint of caution in her tone. "Once we go public, there's no turning back. They might try to discredit you, paint this as an overreaction." Camille's gaze didn't waver. "I'm ready, Lena. I've spent too long fighting for others' rights in silence. It's time to fight for my own, and for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong." Lena smiled approvingly. "Then let's do this. I'll have the article ready for publication by the weekend. We'll hit hard, and we won't let this get buried." Camille nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. As she left the cafe, she understood that this was more than just a fight for her dignity. It was a stand against a system that needed to be held accountable. It was out there now, and no amount of deflection would bury it. This was just the beginning, and she was prepared to see it through to the end. As days passed, Camille's story continued to spread, gaining momentum far beyond her city. Judges, lawyers, and civil rights activists from across the country began to share their own experiences, revealing stories of subtle but persistent biases within the legal system. The hashtag Justice for Judge Dawson quickly trended on social media, with people calling for accountability and change within the very institutions meant to protect fairness. In response, legal organizations and prominent figures voiced their support, publicly demanding transparency and systemic reform. Camille's inbox overflowed with messages from other Black judges and attorneys who shared similar struggles, thanking her for her bravery and pledging to stand beside her. This was no longer just Camille's fight, it had become a national conversation. The pressure on the police department mounted, and their resistance only intensified. Officer Miller, determined to defend his actions, claimed that Camille had refused to comply with standard security checks. The department even doubled down, releasing selective footage from courthouse cameras, depicting Camille in a way that suggested she was confrontational. The attempt to discredit her only fueled public outrage, as viewers saw through the manipulation, recognizing these tactics as desperate attempts to deflect from the true issue of systemic discrimination. Under growing pressure, city officials announced an independent investigation into the incident, with civil rights groups insisting on their involvement to ensure fairness. The inquiry promised to be transparent and free from police influence, but many feared the results could be controlled to downplay the issue. Yet the police department's walls, once thought impenetrable, began to crack under the weight of public scrutiny. For Camille, each day brought new challenges and even threats. Some accused her of exaggerating or trying to create division. But with every attempt to undermine her, the voices of support grew louder. She realized that this was more than her own battle. It was a turning point for countless others who had suffered in silence. The truth was out, and the call for justice could not be silenced. Determined to take control of the narrative, Camille, with Lena McKinney's support, organized a public event at Liberty Square. It was an evening gathering, and as the sun set, a diverse crowd filled the space, some holding signs demanding justice, others simply there to witness the truth. Media outlets arrived in force, and cameras flashed as Camille approached the podium, her face resolute, her stance unwavering. "Thank you all for being here," Camille began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I stand here not only as a judge but as a person who believes in the principles of justice and equality. What happened to me at the courthouse was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a deeper sickness within our system, a system that too often sees some people as less deserving of respect and dignity than others." The crowd responded with supportive applause, and Camille continued, feeling their energy lifting her. "This is not just about one officer's actions, but about an institution that allows, even enables, such behavior to continue unchecked. The issue here isn't just about me, it's about every individual who's ever been stopped, questioned, or doubted simply because of the color of their skin." Lena stood by her side, capturing every moment, her camera crew broadcasting Camille's words live. "Today," Camille declared, her voice rising with conviction, "we're shining a light on the dark corners of this system. This fight isn't just about one incident, it's about demanding accountability, transparency, and respect for every person who walks through those courthouse doors." Her words ignited the crowd. Chants of "Justice for all" and "Equality now" echoed across the square, a powerful display of unity. The police department, which had tried to frame her as the problem, could no longer hide behind excuses. The people saw through their narrative, and the truth was too glaring to ignore. As the event wrapped up, reporters rushed forward, questioning Camille and Lena. The support and solidarity from the public were undeniable, and Camille knew they had made an impact. This wasn't just her battle anymore, it was a movement. And from this point forward, she would no longer be standing alone. Camille took a deep breath, looking out over the sea of faces gathered before her. The crowd had grown, their presence a testament to the shared desire for change. She felt the gravity of the moment, knowing that her words could amplify a call for justice that had been ignored for far too long. "Today, I'm here not only as a judge," she began, her voice carrying with conviction, "but as someone who has experienced firsthand the sting of prejudice. This isn't just about what happened to me. It's about every person who has ever been dismissed, doubted, or degraded simply because of who they are." The crowd responded with nods and murmurs of agreement, fueling Camille's resolve. "We like to think that the justice system is fair, that it's blind, that it serves everyone equally. But the truth is, justice is only as fair as the people who enforce it. And too often, that fairness is clouded by bias, by indifference, and by a lack of accountability." She paused, letting her words sink in, watching as her message resonated with the people before her. "What happened at the courthouse door wasn't just an insult to me as a person, it was an affront to justice itself. When we allow prejudice to seep into our legal system, we weaken the very foundation of our society." Camille's voice grew stronger, her words clear and impassioned. "The problem is not one officer or one courthouse. It's a pattern, a deeply embedded issue that affects countless people every day. People like me. People like you. People who come to these institutions hoping for fairness but leave feeling betrayed." A murmur of agreement spread through the crowd, and Camille felt their support empowering her. She continued, "I refuse to be silent. I refuse to let this be another story that fades away. This isn't just about my dignity, it's about the dignity of everyone who believes in justice, everyone who has been told they don't belong." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the square. Camille raised her hand, signaling for silence, her face set with determination. "I stand here today, not alone, but with every one of you, with every voice that has ever been silenced. Together, we demand accountability. We demand a system that serves everyone, not just a privileged few. And we won't stop until we achieve it." Chants of "Justice for all" and "Equality now" rang out, the crowd united in purpose. Camille's heart swelled with emotion, realizing that this was more than a speech, it was a call to action, a rallying cry for a movement that would not be ignored. As she stepped away from the podium, the applause was deafening. Camille had poured her heart and soul into her words, and the crowd's response was proof that her message had struck a chord. She knew that this moment would echo far beyond Liberty Square, inspiring others to stand up, to speak out, and to demand the justice they deserved. The day after Camille's powerful speech, the police department held a press conference to address the public outcry. Police Chief Robert Kern stepped up to the podium, visibly tense under the weight of the camera lenses and the watchful eyes of the crowd gathered outside. He cleared his throat before speaking. "We are aware of the concerns raised by Judge Dawson and the public," Chief Kearns began, his tone measured. "The police department takes these allegations very seriously. While we believe that Officer Miller was following standard protocol, we understand that this incident has exposed some areas where we need to improve." The chief paused, glancing down at his notes, then continued. "Effective immediately, we are launching a comprehensive review of our policies, particularly those involving courthouse security and interactions with judiciary members. We are also implementing mandatory training focused on racial bias and sensitivity to ensure that every individual is treated with the respect they deserve." Some reporters exchanged skeptical glances, sensing that these words might be an attempt to appease rather than enact genuine change. Yet Chief Kearns pressed on, announcing the establishment of an independent oversight committee to investigate any future complaints of bias or discrimination within the department. "We are committed," he concluded, "to building a department that serves everyone equally and upholds the values of fairness and justice." Despite the promises, Camille knew that real change wouldn't come easily. Still, this was a step forward, a small victory that hinted at the possibility of lasting reform. The pressure was on, and she was prepared to keep fighting until these words turned into meaningful action. The police department's promises of reform sparked a surge of hope and determination within the community. Camille's story continued to inspire people from all walks of life, and soon, it was no longer just her city rallying behind the cause. Across the country, activists, lawyers, and judges began to call for similar changes within their own legal systems. Community leaders organized marches and town hall meetings, where citizens gathered to discuss issues of racial justice and demand accountability from their local institutions. The hashtag Justice for All grew in popularity, uniting people under a shared vision of fairness and equality. News outlets covered the growing movement, interviewing people who were inspired by Camille's courage and commitment to speaking truth to power. She had become more than just a judge. She was now a symbol of resilience and a beacon of hope for those who felt unseen within the justice system. For Camille, seeing this groundswell of support was both humbling and invigorating. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that her fight was igniting a broader call for justice that couldn't be silenced. In cities across the nation, similar stories emerged, and local governments faced mounting pressure to examine and reform their own policies. Camille's stand was no longer just a personal battle, it had transformed into a national reckoning. The movement had taken on a life of its own, and it was clear that meaningful change was within reach. In the months following Camille's stand, a powerful shift began to ripple through communities nationwide. Inspired by her courage, people demanded accountability from their local institutions, pushing for reforms in places that had resisted change for decades. Town halls overflowed with citizens sharing stories of prejudice and discrimination, and city councils found themselves pressured to act by an ever-growing movement. One by one, police departments and courthouses across the country announced new initiatives aimed at rooting out systemic biases. In Camille's own city, the courthouse initiated programs to address racial sensitivity and accountability. Officers underwent mandatory bias training, and a community oversight board was formed, giving citizens a voice and holding law enforcement accountable. For many, these changes were long overdue, and Camille watched with a profound sense of accomplishment. She attended community meetings where citizens spoke openly about their struggles, their hopes, and their renewed trust in a system they felt had wronged them for too long. "This isn't just policy change," one community leader remarked. "It's a shift in how we see each other, how we respect each other." And it started with Camille Dawson's bravery. Across the country, judges and attorneys who had once been skeptical began to recognize the need for reform within their own jurisdictions. Several legal associations adopted policies that would encourage diversity and require continued education on racial equity. Community-based workshops were set up to bridge the divide between law enforcement and the public, with people sharing experiences in an effort to foster understanding and mutual respect. Camille became a sought-after speaker, traveling to cities to share her story and offer guidance on building fairer systems. She spoke not only about the discrimination she had faced, but about the broader vision of justice and dignity for all. Her words resonated deeply, not just with activists and community leaders, but with ordinary citizens who had never before felt empowered to question authority. The movement sparked by Camille also reached the legislative level. Lawmakers, influenced by the stories and the pressure from their constituents, began drafting bills to ensure transparency and accountability within law enforcement. Proposals for independent review boards, mandatory body cameras, and improved training on racial sensitivity became focal points of these new laws. Politicians who had once sidestepped discussions on systemic racism were now championing reforms, driven by a groundswell of public demand. Watching these changes unfold, Camille felt an indescribable pride and a sense of unity she hadn't known before. The fight had been exhausting, and the backlash had been intense, but the outcome was undeniable. She had set off a movement that was reshaping how people thought about justice, fairness, and equality. Yet Camille knew that these were only the first steps. Real change takes time, she often told the audiences she addressed. We've started the journey, but it's up to every one of us to make sure it continues. Her words served as both an inspiration and a reminder that while much had been accomplished, the work was far from over. The impact of Camille's stand was now woven into the fabric of the community, a testament to what could be achieved when individuals chose to speak up. It was a shift that had begun with her personal fight but had grown into a transformative movement for an entire society. The day Camille returned to the courthouse, she felt a renewed strength and sense of purpose. Walking through the familiar marble halls, she noticed how the air felt different, lighter yet more powerful. Colleagues and courthouse staff greeted her with warm nods and genuine smiles, their expressions reflecting a newfound respect. Camille could feel the shift, a quiet acknowledgement of all she had endured and the change she had helped bring about. As she approached the courtroom, Jamal, her dedicated assistant, walked up beside her. He looked at her with admiration, his eyes filled with pride. "Judge Dawson," he said, unable to contain his smile. "Welcome back. How does it feel to be here, knowing everything you've accomplished?" Camille paused, taking in the weight of his words. "It feels right, Jamal," she replied, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. "It feels like we've started something that can't be turned back. This place finally feels like it belongs to all of us." They continued down the hallway, and Camille could sense the respectful glances from those around her. She knew that her fight wasn't over, but for the first time, she felt truly seen. She wasn't just a judge returning to work. She was a symbol of resilience and a reminder of the power that one voice could hold. As she stepped into her courtroom and took her seat at the bench, Camille felt a profound sense of peace mixed with determination. This was her place, her court, and she was ready to serve with a new strength, knowing that her presence there was more meaningful than ever. Justice, she realized, wasn't just something that happened within the courtroom walls. It was a battle that had to be fought and defended, both inside and outside these halls. A few weeks later, Camille stood on a stage before a packed community center, the faces of people from all walks of life watching her with anticipation. The event was a community forum on justice and reform, organized by local leaders and civil rights advocates, who saw Camille's story as a catalyst for a larger movement. As she looked out over the diverse crowd, she felt a deep sense of purpose, knowing that her journey had led her to this moment. Taking a steadying breath, Camille began. "Thank you all for being here today. It's truly humbling to see so many of you, people who care deeply about justice, fairness, and the future we're building together." Her voice was calm yet filled with passion, and the room fell silent, each person drawn in by her words. Camille continued. "Many of you know my story. You know that I was stopped at the courthouse doors, denied entry to the very place I had dedicated my life to serving. But what happened to me wasn't an isolated incident. It was a reflection of a much larger issue, a reminder that justice isn't a given, it's something we must actively pursue and protect. The crowd nodded, their expressions a mix of empathy and resolve. Camille's gaze softened as she looked out over the crowd. I'm standing here today not because of my title or my position, but because of a belief that every one of us deserves respect, dignity, and fairness. True justice isn't about titles or authority. It's about treating every person, regardless of who they are, with the humanity they deserve. Her words resonated deeply, and a ripple of agreement spread through the room. She continued, We've seen progress, yes. Policies are changing, training is being implemented, and committees are being formed. But let me tell you this, policy change is only the beginning. The real work is in changing minds and hearts. Camille paused, letting the gravity of her words settle. Each of us has a role in this. It's not just the responsibility of those in power. Justice belongs to all of us, and we each have a responsibility to protect it. When we see injustice, we must speak out. When we witness discrimination, we cannot look away. Silence only serves the oppressor. The audience erupted into applause, and Camille took a moment to let their support bolster her spirit. I want to challenge each of you, she continued, her voice strong and clear. Ask yourselves, how can you contribute to this movement? How can you stand up for justice in your own life? Maybe it's by supporting someone who has been wronged. Maybe it's by calling out bias when you see it. Maybe it's simply by listening to those who feel unseen and unheard. As she spoke, Camille could see people nodding, some wiping away tears. Her message had hit home, and she knew that every person in that room felt empowered to be part of the change. Camille closed her speech with a powerful message. Justice is not a destination. It's a journey, a continuous effort that we must commit to every single day. And it doesn't happen alone. It happens when we come together, when we support each other, and when we refuse to give up. This movement isn't about me. It's about us. It's about creating a world where our children and grandchildren can walk into any room, any courthouse, and know they will be respected for who they are. The room filled with thunderous applause, people rising from their seats in a standing ovation. Camille felt a surge of hope, knowing that her words had sparked something meaningful. This wasn't just an event. It was the beginning of a collective mission, one that would carry her message far beyond the walls of this room. As she stepped down from the stage, people approached her, thanking her for her courage and vision. Leaders and activists alike promised to carry her message forward, to take her words into their own communities, their schools, and their workplaces. Camille smiled, a quiet but profound pride filling her heart. The fight for justice, she knew, was far from over, but now, she was no longer fighting alone. The impact of Camille's journey and the movement she inspired had reached a critical turning point, as tangible reforms began to take root within the justice system. These weren't just symbolic gestures. They were concrete actions aimed at restructuring how justice was served and ensuring accountability across the board. In Camille's own city, the police department announced a series of sweeping reforms, beginning with the establishment of a permanent community oversight board. This board, composed of community leaders, civil rights advocates, and independent experts, had the authority to review complaints against officers and recommend disciplinary action. This shift was monumental. For the first time, the community had a formal role in holding law enforcement accountable. Additionally, the department rolled out mandatory racial bias and sensitivity training for all officers. These sessions weren't just one-time workshops. They became part of an ongoing training curriculum, with officers required to undergo evaluations on their understanding of racial equity and fairness. The goal was to build a new culture within the force, one that acknowledged past failures and committed to doing better. In the courthouse, similar changes were underway. Judges and court staff were now required to participate in diversity training designed to foster a deeper understanding of the communities they served. For the first time, discussions about racial bias in the judicial process were happening openly, with judges reflecting on how their own perceptions might influence their decisions. Camille was invited to lead some of these discussions, sharing her experience and encouraging her colleagues to examine their roles within the system. The city also implemented new hiring practices in both the police force and the courthouse, aimed at increasing diversity and ensuring that more voices were represented within these institutions. Hiring panels included community representatives, and applicants were assessed not only on their qualifications but on their commitment to upholding equity and justice. This was a step toward building a system that truly reflected the people it served. At the state level, lawmakers, spurred by Camille's story and the movement it had ignited, passed legislation to standardize these reforms across all cities. The new laws required every police department to establish an independent oversight committee and mandated regular bias training for all law enforcement personnel. Courts were similarly required to adopt practices that would increase transparency and reduce disparities in sentencing. The changes were not always met with enthusiasm. Some officers and judges resisted, arguing that these measures questioned their integrity or were unnecessary. Yet, as public support for the reforms grew, those voices of dissent became quieter, overshadowed by a collective determination to rebuild trust and fairness in the justice system. For Camille, watching these reforms take shape was both inspiring and humbling. She knew that real change would take time, but she was witnessing the beginning of a cultural shift, a movement toward a more just and inclusive system. At one of the first police training sessions, she spoke directly to a room of new recruits, her presence a reminder of why they were there. "You have chosen to serve the public," Camille told them, her voice steady. "Remember that service means respect for every individual, regardless of who they are or where they come from. This badge you wear is a symbol of trust, and it is your duty to earn that trust every day." As months went by, reports showed a gradual but promising decrease in complaints of racial profiling and misuse of authority. Community members began to express cautious optimism, some even sharing stories of positive interactions with law enforcement, interactions marked by respect and professionalism. It was a small but meaningful indication that the reforms were having an impact. Meanwhile, Camille continued her work as a judge, but now, she carried with her the strength and support of an entire community. She no longer felt like a lone voice in the struggle for justice. She was part of something bigger, a movement that had not only changed policies but had started to heal the relationship between the community and the institutions meant to protect it. These reforms, driven by Camille's courage and the movement she sparked, were far from perfect, and she knew there would always be challenges ahead. But for the first time, there was a sense of real hope that justice could truly be served fairly, without prejudice, and with respect for all. Months had passed, and the courthouse, once a symbol of resistance and pain, now felt like a place of progress and hope for Camille. Every time she stepped through its doors, she carried with her the pride of knowing that her voice had sparked lasting change, not just for herself, but for countless others who had endured silent injustices. The small yet steady reforms continued to take root, gradually transforming the way justice was served. One morning, as Camille walked through the courthouse halls, she noticed something new in the eyes of those she passed. There was respect, yes, but also a shared sense of purpose. Her fight had united people, bridging divides and fostering understanding, creating a space where everyone felt they belonged. At her bench, Camille took a moment to reflect, feeling a quiet but profound satisfaction. The journey had not been easy. It had been marked by confrontation, vulnerability, and sacrifice. Yet, every challenge she had faced was now a part of something larger, a movement toward fairness, toward an inclusive system that treated all people with dignity. She smiled as she thought of the community members, young and old, who had come up to her, inspired by her courage and perseverance. Some of them had told her that they, too, felt emboldened to speak out, to hold their heads high and demand respect. Camille knew that this was just the beginning. The changes she had helped bring about were only the first steps on a path that others would now continue. As she looked around her courtroom, she felt a surge of gratitude. This was more than just a victory. It was a testament to what could happen when one voice refused to stay silent, when one act of courage inspired a collective call for justice. Camille had become a symbol of resilience, But more importantly, she had shown that change was possible, that hope was a force stronger than fear. Turning to the camera, she spoke directly to those watching, her message a gentle yet powerful reminder. "The fight for justice doesn't end here," she said with a calm conviction. "It lives on in every one of us. If my story has inspired you, remember, you have the power to make a difference, no matter who you are or where you come from." With a warm smile, she added, "If you believe in the importance of these stories, please subscribe to our channel. Together, let's keep these conversations going, and let's continue to shine a light on the path to justice and equality." The screen faded as Camille's image lingered, a lasting reminder of the power of persistence and the enduring strength of hope. Camille Dawson's journey had become more than a story. It had become a movement, a beacon for those who dared to believe in a fairer world.